A unifying theme of this channel is project management. Recently, I've been talking a lot about Boeing and what went wrong at Boeing. I've had some time to reflect, and I think it's time for a recapitulation of what we can learn from Boeing. If Boeing rather goes into an irreversible decline, many people will trace that to the 737 MAX having been a bad idea. But the fatal blow to Boeing came much earlier. Ironically, it was the way Boeing's most ambitious product was developed that sowed the seeds of Boeing's problems. And that holds lessons for project management. It was the 787 that is the origin of many of Boeing's problems. If you've flown in one, you know that it's a very nice airplane. If you have delved into why it is such a nice airplane, you might know that it is mostly made of carbon composite, wings, fuselage, control surfaces, all of that. It's amazing by today's standards, so keep in mind this project was started over 20 years ago. It was a tremendously ambitious project, perhaps truly ahead of its time. But that, by itself, isn't what caused Boeing's problems. It wasn't just a too ambitious project. Indeed, it needn't have been too ambitious. It could have been just fine. So what really went wrong? It wasn't just that the airplane had an ambitious set of specifications. It was that the project had too many goals, many of which were in conflict with each other. If that sounds familiar, it might be that Starship comes to mind, a complex set of interlocking strategies that all need to go pretty much as planned, is what brings a lot of projects to grief. In the case of Starship, it has to be able to colonize Mars and put telecommunications satellites into orbit economically, and it has to go to the moon. In the case of the 787, Harry Stonecipher, who I've previously quoted decreeing that the 787 be developed for less money than the 777 and it should be sold for a lower price and have all these technologies developed by outsourced partners, and that the price, all of this is already in conflict with each other, and that doesn't take into account that a lot of component design was outsourced to reduce the need for in-house engineering. And then the factory was located away from Boeing's unions on the opposite coast. None of these goals is in harmony with each other. It all adds up to monstrous arrogance. And that's really what injured Boeing, and that injury and its consequences are what we see today. Managers can make bets that lose. You can't win them all. Apple failed to make synthetic sapphires for iPhone screens. Meta has sunk tens of billions into the metaverse with little rewards so far, but neither of these failures hobbled their respective companies. Their management was careful enough to limit downside risk, even though both Apple and Meta are successful enough to swell the heads of their respective CEOs. Boeing is much worse off. The failure of the 787 project to meet its ambitious goals meant that engineering at Boeing was gutted, and the South Carolina factory couldn't reliably build the planes, and a loss was made on each of the first set of planes sold. That's such a comprehensive failure that Boeing is now left with few alternatives. Had they admitted that failure and rebuilt Boeing engineering, had they admitted the failure of attempting to break their production unions and brought production back to the Pacific Northwest, had they admitted the outsourcing was a failure and had time to fix that, Boeing might now be able to create a truly modern replacement for the 737. But they can't. They can't even afford to try. As another well-known corporate leader recently said, let that sink in.